security was about the role of climate information in food security. And we consider this from different angles, so to say, and all these different aspects that we can go one slide back. So when we spoke about climate information, it was very obvious and confirmed by many participants that TMA is the key source of climate information in Tanzania, and that the importance they play in this respect. But then we continue the discussion looking into who are these intermediaries who are passing this information further to other stakeholders and eventually to farmers. And their very prominent role play the extension services in Tanzania. And here there were also concerns that although they're always very important, in some areas they lack a bit capacity in terms of better skills, but also lack of staff. So they were concerned that some villages are not really supported enough by this intermediary agencies, so to say. And there were some suggestions that farmers themselves should be trained to understand and to learn how to access climate information so that they can play as ambassadors of knowledge in their communities. And then we also spoke how this information, scientific information, can pass to something that we can call knowledge, so something that can really be integrated in decision support and decisions that farmers are making. And here, an obvious element that is very important in Tanzania is local knowledge. So I think we as scientists really need to think very well how we can better integrate local knowledge and experiences with scientific knowledge to achieve this transdisciplinary knowledge production in our project. And there were some concerns that since this local knowledge has been passed from one to the other generation, that maybe with the changing climate, this local knowledge is less reliable, but still there are so many new what we call bottom-up or autonomous adaptation measures that are taking place that I think also we scientists or other stakeholders can learn a lot from farmers. So this link between scientific and local knowledge is very important. We can move to the next slide. We ask what is the how do farmers currently access climate information? And then we can see that over there, for example, SMS services, then TMA has a large mailing list where they send the climate information. Still, this verbal and vocal transmission of information is very important. So radio is very present, and I think we were very happy to have some representatives from local farmer radios with us, at least yesterday. And then also here they call it more like community and word of mouth communication. And this was due to different reasons. Some reasons are also that I think verbal we better can then simplify or contextualize the scientific information. But also there is the issue of illiteracy, for example, in some remote areas, and also a lot of different local languages that need to be, that this information should be communicated in. And then the next slide, we also spoke about the time frame of this information. I think I had more slides, yeah. So then one important, the weather information is very important, certainly, but then we speak about climate information, seasonal focus emerges as a very important one. And then we also discuss different aspects of seasonal focus. And one aspect is again related to language, but more the scientific language. So how can we really transfer something that is probabilistic focus to something that the people can understand? And here we heard some examples that we also know from elsewhere, that, for example, we use terms such as normal range or average climate, looking into historical average of climate, but then how people can perceive this. And then there were good suggestions that we should always relate this with some recent past events. For example, we say average climate as temperature as we evidenced last year, or above average precipitation as is evidenced this spring. So try to be as specific as possible and not stay with this other jargon. And then last slide, we also tackle upon the issue of reliability of climate information. And then this is often discussed in the context of seasonal focus, but here we spoke about the the sensitivity of different phases of crop production. And then there was a good suggestion that, for example, when we speak about soil preparation, seasonal focus is very important, but also we don't need such a precise information, because it's not very important whether it's going to rain one or the other day when we're preparing soil. But from some other processes, such as planting or application of fertilizers, pesticides, or irrigation, the reliability on this weather or climate focus needs to be very, very high. And finally, there was this message that the type of information and the communication channel will very much depend on the local context and on the farmers that we want to target. So when we prepare for this workshop, we always say, know your audience, but we also need to know our service users or our farmers. And I will end with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dragana, for your summary and the input that you presented. So now I'll pass the floor to Alberto for his final summary on the energy section. The floor is yours, Alberto.
Hi, thank you, Roberta. And so if we can move to the, so this is a pretty short summary slide. So just one slide, the nice light bulb. So we discussed some of the issues that are creating some problems with the provision of power, Tanzania, but it could be also other countries, and this is to do with outages, for example. So we touched on outages due to drought, particularly in 2005, 2010, and 16. And this impacted hydropower, particularly, and affected the population severely. So this is just one example. That we know that with the climate is affecting other aspects of the energy demand and supply. In particular, in Tanzania, the production of energy is mostly due currently to biomass. It's produced through biomass. There is a very high proportion of the population, around nearly 70%, that use wood as their fuel, and that actually is leading to high deforestation, 100,000 hectares per year, roughly. So that's actually counter to what we should be doing for climate change. And so that's an additional reason to look at alternative ways to produce electricity, which is what we're told is happening. So there's quite a lot of planning for new hydropower plants. There are three were mentioned, three pretty large hydropower plants, but there is also some development in wind and solar. And of course, because of the reliability the reliance of the sources on climate, there is a stated requirement that we heard from our representative from TANESCO yesterday, Dr. Robert Myungi, that there is a clear need to have climate services that can help with the planning and operations of their new energy systems. So we talked about seasonal forecast, and with particularly high resolution would be very useful, as well as climate projections on the range of 2030, 2040, particularly for renewable energy development planning, wind and solar, but also atlas, and this could come in the form of climate atlas. We also heard from Dr. Sarah Ozima, that although TMA is helping and supporting all these activities in TANESCO, there's also challenges in terms of, for example, the digitalization of observations and more importantly, the actual measurements from ground stations that are obviously required to complete the funding and financing of some of the power plants. So although we can use some broad perspectives from say-the analysis or downscale information, the local measured information is always required in order to close the deals. So these are some of the challenges, but it's very good that overall Tanzania is moving towards a transformed energy system, and that there is a clearly stated need for climate services. So with that, I'll thank you and I'll hand it over back to Roberta.
Thank you, Alberto. And finally, I'll give the floor to Nicholas, who had to prepare his wrap-up today. And thank you, Nicholas, for doing that. And
yeah, no problem. We have a lot of input, both from the three speakers and then in the breakout sessions. We came back on some of the questions and issues which were addressed during the presentation. So there is a summary here on this slide. I think you can all see. So we had some questions for specific to Tanzania about the type of asset and infrastructure which were exposed to climate change and weather hazards. So you can see the list here. Some were shown during the presentation, especially the ones affected by sea level rise and flooding. So we had roads, bridges, but we also identified that other large assets have been exposed in the recent past to weather events, and that includes, farms, power line we see for the energy sector also yesterday, on power plants, on dams. Then we dived a bit deeper to have a look what was the cause of this impacts on hazards on these assets, and that was identified that the main weather hazards were either no rainfall at all for drought, but otherwise generally they were associated with extreme events of rainfall, water level, air temperature, and wind in the case of storm. Then we move to the questions of all these weather hazard and especially their future patterns, future change are taken into account in the past design or the future design of infrastructure and assets. And although we were not fully aware of that before the workshop, so that was a very useful insight from TMA, that there is a regulation in place in Tanzania. There's a TMA Act number 2, which is called, from 2019, which made it mandatory for any asset manager or building companies to take into account climate change. So in fact, generally, if there is compliance, there is the integration of weather climate information in the design of the major infrastructures. Of course, the challenge is, as was mentioned in the talk of TMA or of Dr. Yanda, that how do you make use of the latest available weather or climate information, especially when we are talking about long-term climate projections. We have a lot of models available, there are a lot of uncertainties, so that requires quite significant investment of time, and that's something we can do, for example, in this project, applied research project, this focus project. But for a company like our end users, in the case of the SGR railway infrastructure in Tanzania, COWI, it's really more difficult because making a selection on the application of the data to derive some design values of temperature, rainfall, or wind for a specific asset requires quite a lot of time. And generally in the setting up of a contract for developing a basis of design for an infrastructure, you don't have the 1 year or 1.5 years which are required to really assess the robustness of the climate projection you are going to use and apply to derive this extreme value of different parameters for a specific asset. So that's one of the elements we are focusing in Horizon 2020, and we'll be working on TMA, hoping to select the best currently available climate projections and methods to derive some design values. We'll not probably come up with some climate change factors as the industry is looking for, type of climate atlas, which will work for any type of assets, any type of parameter. That's not realistic, but we can come to something quite close to their requirements. I think during this project, working with them on TMA. And this type of setup anyway, that's the advantage in the infrastructure sector, that these methods are quite generic. So they could be applied not only to the railway infrastructure that we are focusing on in the project, but also these other assets that we wanted and we had identified during these breakout sessions today. So that's quite a positive learning that, you know, we got out of these breakout sessions and presentation for us to go further, you know, in the development of our product, climate services in this project. So I'd like to thank again all the presenters on contribution in the breakout session. We had a lot from different people who are involved in different agencies in Tanzania. And that was, I think, a very successful infrastructure session. Thank you.